Thanks for viewing. This is part 8 of a series on how to design a timber frame in Fusion 360, recorded for the Yes Tomorrow Design Build School. In this part, I'm going to model the rafters. So let's get started. So here's where the model stands after the part 7 video. We have all of the bents drawn, and we also have the top plates on and all the braces in the wall. So the last step really in designing the frame is to add rafters. And if you remember back to the first video, we did inside the master component, we did 3 sketches, and one of those was a bent sketch. And if we look straight at it here, you'll see that we actually modeled the rafters. At the time, we were doing so to figure out how tall these 2 inner posts were. So basically, we have pretty much what we need to extrude a rafter. And then we're going to reproduce a single rafter throughout the whole building. So I will start by going up to my top level component, and I'm going to make a new component, and I'm going to call this Rafters, plural, and that's activated. So now I'm going to make one more component, and I'm going to call that Rafter, singular. And that is activated. Let's see, where's our timeline? That's odd. I'm not seeing the timeline. Let me go to rafters here. Okay. I guess I'm not seeing a timeline because there's nothing in the rafter timeline. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So I am going to start by being in the rafter component, and I can hover over this sketch that was in our master and do an E for extrude and click here and here. So the rafter is basically going to be half lapped where this overlapping rectangle is. So I'm going to push this backwards and type in -4. So that is a rafter, but we're going to do one more extrude right here on this surface, and I'm going to push in 2 inches here, -2. So that's going to cut in 2 inches to the rafter that we just modeled. So let me hide the master sketch, and you can see the body that was just created. And that was created inside this rafter component. If we open it up, if I hide bodies in there, you can see that's where it is. All right, so before I reproduce this rafter along these top plates, I'm going to reproduce the first one and put it on the other side of the building. So in order to do that, basically all we have to do is a copy and a rotate, which will be part of our copy. So I'm going to right click on rafter and do a copy, and then I'm going to right click on rafters and do a paste, not a paste new. I want an identical copy. But with identical copies we can rotate. So I'm going to rotate around 180 degrees on this rotation plane. And now I want to put it in position. So the easiest way to move in Fusion is this point to point. And as long as you've got points that will work for you. And in this case, if I go from this point, so this is our origin point, and I'm going to come over to this point, so this is our target point, and the rafter is perfectly positioned. So I'm going to do an OK. So now, if I collapse this rafter down, you'll see that we have a second copy of that first rafter inside the rafters component. So I can hide both by just hiding that one component. Okay, so now we're going to use the rectangular pattern feature. So I'm going to go up to that, and we want to pattern components. And now we can select the components we want to pattern. So basically, I'm going to go over to the browser and just click on these first two rafters. Now it wants to know the axis that we want to move along. I can pick this line on the top plate, anything that's going in that direction. And now the next choice in the dialog box is the distribution. Do we want an extent, how far this goes, or do we want spacing? And we'll look at both of these. So if I do extent, and I can move this down in this direction, and let's see what happens if I pick this face right here. Okay, so we end up going a little bit too far because our pivot was in the middle of this rafter. But we do have a distance here in axis 1. So if I subtract 2 inches from that, do 41 feet 4 inches, you can see that we are now at the end of the building, which is great. But we only have 3 rafters, so that's a little bit deficient. So I'm going to change the quantity here. If I type in 10, you can see what we get. And you're seeing a lot of these axes now. I think what I've got is probably, origin. Let me see where those are. I'm not sure why those are appearing. We don't have our top level origin on. We don't have our rafter origin. Oh, let me open up. And we don't have the origin inside those rafters. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But anyway, I'm going to ignore that for now and just continue to change the quantity here. And you can see we're closing the distance up between rafters. So that's one way of doing it. And so we would get even spacing here. Let me do 18 of them and see what we get. Okay, so now if I do an I for inspect and I click on this line and this line, you can see that we're 2'5" and 11/64 apart. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our top level rafter, and that's where our pattern, our rectangular pattern is. So if I right click on that and edit the rectangular pattern, we're back in that dialog box. And now I can change this. I'll go to 17. Let's see what we get there. So again, I'll do an I, measure the distance between these two rafters. And now we have 2'7" between each rafter, which is pretty good. So that works. So let me show you another way of doing that. I am going to close out of the inspect dialog box, right click on our rectangular pattern, edit it. We could say we want spacing, and now the spacing is 2'7". Let's see if we went to 3 feet. So this is 3 feet on center between each rafter, and you can see that I'm a little bit beyond the end of the building and I have too many of them. But if you wanted to do that type of spacing, you could do that. Okay, so I'm going to undo. So we've got a nice rafter spacing. We've reproduced it, and that's pretty much how you do rafters. Very straightforward.